All right, guys, so by now you should be very familiar with the built-in data structures in JavaScript like arrays, objects, even sets and maps, which are pretty easy. But now I want to cover some custom data structures that are not built into the language. And these are really common in when you're looking at like data structures and algorithms when you're studying for interviews and stuff like that. I'll be honest with you and say that you're probably not going to need to implement a stack in the type of web development that we're looking at. But it does really help you train your brain and train you to think like a programmer. And it's important to know for like job interviews and stuff like that. So we're going to look at a couple different data structures and we're going to create classes that implement them. So stacks, for instance, are not available just in JavaScript. Like you can't say something equals new stack like you can a map or a set or an array. But we're going to create a class that lets us do that. And it has to behave like a stack, and that's a very specific way. And we've actually looked at this before when we looked at the call stack in the browser. So a stack is last in, first out. So I have this diagram that I created here. Very simple. So let's say we have a 1 on the bottom of the stack, and then a 2 gets pushed on. Okay, that's the terminology, is push and pop. Then a 3 gets pushed on, 4, 5. Now, to take items off the stack, it has to be from the top because it's last in, first out. In this case, 5 was the last one put on, so it has to be the first one popped off. Then 4 will get popped off, then 3, then 2, then 1. All right, so the way we're going to do this is create a class that has these specific methods. So push is going to push it onto the top of the stack. Pop is going to pop it off from the top of the stack. Peek is going to allow us to look at what is on top of the stack. Length is going to give us the length of the items in the stack. Is empty will return true if it's empty, false if it's not, and then clear will clear everything off the stack. So let's go ahead and implement this in a class. And of course, it has to work just like a stack. It has to be first in, last in, first out. So let's go ahead and create a class, and then we're going to have a constructor because I want to have two properties. One is going to be the array of items, okay, because that's ultimately where our data is going to be stored. And I'm using the underscore convention just because we're not going to be accessing this property outside of the class. Same thing with count. So count is going to be set to 0 initially, and that just represents the count of the stack, how many items are in it. Then we want to be able to push items onto the stack. So we'll say push, and that's going to take in an item or an element, whatever you want to call it, just a piece of data. And in some tutorials and articles and stuff, you'll see like this underscore items dot, and then they'll use like the JavaScript push method on that you can use for arrays. I don't want to do that because I want to keep this more bare bones and low level. I kind of feel like this is cheating using the predefined push method, but I mean, you can if you want. So let's say this dot items, and then as an index, we'll have the count. So this dot underscore count, and we'll set that to the item that's passed in. And then we just want to increment the count. So this dot underscore count plus plus. Now, we don't have like the peek method or anything yet so that we can peek in and see what the top item is or anything. So I'm just going to initialize it, and we'll just console log the entire stack. So let's create a variable. We'll call it stack, and we're going to set it to a new stack. So we're just initializing our class or instantiating our class. And then let's just do a console log of stack. And if I do it without pushing anything on, obviously the count 0, we have our default state, right? But if I come down here and I say stack.push, and I'm just going to push on a string of item 1. And now if we take a look, we have count is 1, and then we have our item 1 inside of our stack. So I'm going to do item 2, and let's do item 3. So now our count's 3. So push is working as you would expect. All right, now to pop an item off is going to be a little bit more difficult. And like I said, you could take the easy route and just say this dot items, and then use the JavaScript pop method, but we're not going to do that. We're going to keep this more low level. Now I want to just check first to make sure that the count isn't 0, because we don't want to pop off if there's nothing there. That's called an unstack underflow. So let's do this dot underscore, I'm sorry, we want to do an if statement. So we'll say if this dot underscore count is equal to 0, then I'm just going to return a string of underflow. And you can return undefined or whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to return a string of underflow. Now, in order to pop this off, the last item, right? So in this case, if we do stack.pop, we want 3 to pop off because that was the last in. We want that to be the first out. So to have it just be gone totally and not just set it to undefined or not just return what's to be popped off, there's a little bit of work that we have to do here. So, and we're going to use a for loop to do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and type it out, and then I'll kind of explain it a little more. So we're going to set just a variable here of item, and we're going to set it to this dot underscore items, and for the index, we're going to say this dot underscore count, and we're going to -1 from that. Okay, so this is ultimately the item that is going to be returned, and then I'm going to decrement the count, so this dot underscore count minus. Actually, let's put that up there. All right, then we're going to do our for loop, and the for loop is going to start at the count. So we're going to say let I equals this dot underscore count, and then we'll say as long as I is less than this dot underscore items items length, items dot length. So as long as the array, and then we're going to increment by 1, and then within this for loop, I'm going to set this dot underscore items, and we're going to set whatever that current I variable is, that iteration, we're going to basically shift it to the left. So this dot underscore items, and then set that to I plus 1. All right, and then after the for loop, we're going to set this dot items dot length. We want to set that to the count. So this dot underscore count, and then we want to return the item. All right, now let's see if this works. So I'm going to come over here and say stack dot pop. If I do that, then item 3 should just be completely gone. Count goes down to 2. Okay, right here, count goes down to 2, and then item 3 is gone. Now, we could make this a little bit easier, of course, by using the JavaScript pop method, but we could have also used like slice to slice it out from the array, but I didn't want to use anything like that, so we just use the for loop. And what this does, by taking each of the items and basically adding 1 to the index, is it pushes them, it shifts them to the left. Right, so we're getting rid of the last item and then we're shifting the rest to the left. That's really what we're doing here with this loop. Okay, and then we're just returning this item, which has the 1 less than the count for the, which is obviously the last one because it's 0 based, so it's going to be 1 less than the count. Like, right now there's a count of 2, but the last item has an index of 1, so that's why we -1 here. All right, still kind of hard to explain, but I think that this is one of the best solutions without having to use any of the predefined methods. So that's pretty much the most difficult method that we're going to do here. We're going to add a peek method, which is going to allow us to just see what is on top of the stack. So for that, I actually want to check to make sure that it's not 0 like we did here. So why don't we, before we do the peek, why don't we just create a method, because we're going to have an isEmpty. So right here we'll say if this dot is empty, and then we'll just quickly add that down here. So isEmpty, and all I'm going to do is return if that count is equal to 0. So it'll be true or false. All right, then in peek, we can say if this dot is empty, then let's just return a string that says no items in stack. All right, and if there are items, then all we're going to do is return the top one. So let's say return this dot underscore items, and for the index, remember to get the last one, it's going to be whatever the count is minus 1, just like I just showed you above in the pop method. So now if we come down here and instead of console logging the stack, let's say stack dot peak. Actually, let's put something before this. We'll just say like top. Let's put some quotes here, and we'll say top item. So top item is item 2. All right. Now, I also want to be able to get the length. Now we have the count, right? But that's a property, and that's supposed to be a private property that has an underscore. Technically, I could use it. Like I can say console log in here. Let's just say stack length, and I could just say stack dot underscore count, and that works. But I'm not supposed to do this, right? This underscore identifies this as private, so I'm not supposed to use this outside of the class. So what I want to be able to do is say stack.length like that. So up here we'll say length, and all we're going to do is return this dot underscore count, and we get the same thing. Stack length is 2, right? And it's 2 because I initially added 3, but then I popped one off. So let's add a couple more. We'll say 4, 5. Okay, now the top item is item 4 because I popped off item 5. If I do it another pop, then top item is going to be item 3. All right, and then the last thing I want to be able to do is just clear it. So of course we want to set the items. We want to empty that out to just an array, and then we also need to make sure that we reset the count to 0. So if I go right here and say stack.clear, then we get no items in stack. Stack length is 0. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, like I said, doing higher level web development like I do, like I teach, you're probably not going to have to do this and use a stack. In most cases, we can just use a built-in array or a map or something. But this is good to know. And it also just, it trains your brain, you know, knowing how to do this stuff. And I think the biggest advantage is with like interviews and stuff like that, trying to get hired. A lot of times you have to answer, you know, how does the stack work? And you might even be asked to do this either on, you know, in a text editor or on a whiteboard, you know, so it's good to know. So I wanted to have it in here, and it's just something to kind of train your brain. So I would look into other data structures as well. We're going to look at a queue next, which is similar to a stack, except it's not last in, first out. It's first in, first out. So we'll look at that next.